Alright, so in this video, I'm going to show how I wrote the stored procedures for the metrics. So in previous videos, we saw, um, we tested and saw how the individual metrics um, were tested using simple SQL select statements. And then in the last video, we saw how a combined query of all the metrics was executed to give a result of each metric all at once. So in here, what I did is a store procedure for each metric without taking parameters, so without filters. And so what these store procedures do is exactly what we saw in the previous video of each metric as a select query. So these store procedures are stored in the database. So basically, this is the creations script of the salt count metric stored procedure. So quickly explaining the syntax of this creation query, it basically says create or replace the function called salt count metric. So what this does is to create this function with this name and the definition that follows. And in case the function or stored procedure is already created in the database, this part, what it does is to replace that existing stored procedure in the database and replace it with this stored procedure. So we can run this in the server, and it will create the salt count metric and replace it every time this is executed. So we create the store procedure with the name salt count metric, and as we see, this doesn't take any parameters. So that is what I previously said, that these store procedures are without parameters, so without filtering. So this store procedure scans for all the table using the salt count metric. So we create the function, we declare what kind of data type this function will return. We give it a name. This is the value that will return, so I name it result. And then with the declare keyword, we start defining the function. So, I apologize. We declare our variables, our local variables that we will use inside the function. So over here, I just declare one variable, which is a numeric, called salt count. So basically, this variable, this numeric variable, is where we will store the result of the metric query, which is basically the same that we previously tested individually just as a query. So basically what we're doing here is storing the basic metric query, in this case salt count metric, inside the store procedure, which can be called easily. So then with the keyword begin, we start defining the algorithm of the store procedure. So in this case, it is the salt count metric, which we previously tested as a query. and we say the only difference from the previous isolated query is that here we say select, we say the same logic of the metric, but instead of just executing the select statement, we execute the select statement and put the keyword into and select a variable. The variable in this case that I previously declared before the function over here. So it's a numeric variable called sold count. So here we select the metric into the sold count variable. And of course, we're using the property raw table from the March 2019 database. So we selected into sold count, the variable sold count we previously declared, and then we return sold count. So pretty straight up, return it, return sold count, we end the function, and this is part of the syntax of pgSQL, the PostgreSQL language. Say result, which is the result we define, we're going to return as numeric, and we say the language this store procedure or function is written in is pgSQL. So we could also use the more traditional SQL language, and instead of pgSQL, we would state just SQL in uppercase over here. So to create this store procedure, we just select this creation statement, and we simply do the same as with the testing of the individual metrics. We go to the database, okay, and we paste, okay, I'm sorry, okay, we paste the creation script of the sold count metric, and this will create the store procedure or function inside the database. So I already created all of the metrics. Basically, we see here I got a metric. I'm sorry, I got a store procedure for each metric. So we got the same metric, sold count metric, sold volume metric, sold average metric, and so on. So we only paste this creation script on the database, over here. We just copy. We got the sold count metric, sold volume metric, sold average metric, and we would copy each and every one we want to create into the database. We execute it, and we will see that the function is created and is located in the functions folder. So I already created all of the metrics, so I have all of the metrics here inside the functions folder, as you will see. And also what we can do is to execute the whole script all at once to create all of the metrics at once. So we would copy all of this, and here I wrote a little execution statement before each one of the queries of store procedures of the metrics. So this is the store procedure creation script, and here is the execution script, which only what it does is it calls or executes the store procedure we previously created and return the value with a custom column name for the result. I did this with all of the metrics, and so as I said previously, you can execute it each one by one, or you could actually select all of the script and select it and execute it all at once, so that all of the functions or stored procedures are created at the same time. And so here we see that I already have created all of the stored procedures, so I can call them or execute them anyway, anytime I want. And so what I do is only select the execution query, paste it. In this case, I'm going to execute the salt volume metric store procedure, and I execute it. I don't know how much it will take for the salt volume metric, but okay, it's done. And here we are. Here we get the result of the salt volume metric just by calling the store procedure. And if we see, this is quicker than the previous tests. And so now I will execute the salt count metric, which was the one I previously executed in the first video on testing the initial test of the metrics. So I will execute the store procedure of the salt count metric, and it is executing right now, and it gave me the result. It is 3,389,655 for the salt count metric. So I can definitely see here the difference in speed of execution of the stored procedure. Because the stored procedure, because it is already stored in the database, it has the result handy to return more quickly instead of doing the initial query as we had it. So each and every one of the queries is optimized already, and each query has a store procedure in the database for a total metric without parameters. So I will write also a store procedure for each of the metrics, which can take parameters, so that we can filter the result of the metrics based on any condition we want to give to the store procedure using the parameters. So we will see that in our video once those store procedures are created. And basically this is the process of creating store procedures and then executing them. And also we prove how the metrics are optimized a lot once they are encapsulated in stored procedures. For example, this cell count metric now executed in 8.131 seconds. So these are the stored procedures. The basic stored procedures, which take no parameters. So in another video we will see how the same stored procedures based on each metric can receive parameters to do a dynamic filtering inside the stored procedure.